everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Cutting Room Floor podcast of Grace Church. My name's Larry. I'm joined today by Pastor Wes.
Good to see everybody.
Or speak to them, whatever. Depends on how you're doing this. You might see us. You might see us. You might listen.
You might be in the car. Please don't look.
Yeah, we can't see you. I mean, it's a whole thing. Well, hey, you started off the sermon on Sunday talking about Toy Story, and we don't need to rehash that because I haven't watched them with my kids.
I don't want to ruin it for you.
And I don't want to. I've watched them, just not with my kids.
Oh, well, it's a whole different thing.
So
don't do that.
I was like ready to.
Your kids are too young for that now. You wait.
But your big point was like there's a power to stories.
Yeah.
Whether it's a simple story that paints a bigger picture, or what. And there's some power in those things that may seem insignificant to others. I will say I was a little offended when you said Toy Story was your favorite more than Star Wars.
Well, when it comes to stories, although both tell a good story, and they both are small stories that tell of a bigger story. Mm-hmm. Star Wars, tells the story between light and darkness. I wonder where they got that plot line. Mm-hmm. Sounds like the prophet Isaiah and what we mention every Christmas. Mm-hmm. So there wasn't much original there, but stories have a power to speak to us in a simple way that then can actually impact all of our life. I mean, I grew up, my parents used to read me stories, and there were some favorite books that we have. And some of those I actually used with my own son. And we read him those bedtime story books. And just like his toy trains that he left at home, he left those books at home too. But I think the stories stick to his soul. I'm sure your girls love that. Do they have a favorite story? Or?
And it's been interesting. I inherited some of the books that I had as a child.
Yep.
Reading some of those books to them now, remembering the stories from way back when. I think the favorite one is one that I loved when I was a kid. It's called Tiggy Goes to the Hospital. And my great grandma bought it for me when I went to go get my tonsils out, because it was all about what to expect at the hospital. But it's just kind of this goofy story about this. I think she's a hedgehog. And
really?
She gets hit by a car and has to go to the hospital. It's a great story, but we like reading that one together. Yeah. It's cool to have some of those books. And one thing my mom did really great was she always wrote who gave us the book.
Oh, that's cool.
And then the family caught on to that. So some of them I have my great grandparents' handwriting inside of those books.
Wow.
So Marky and Selah love those. Evie likes to tear pages out, so we don't let her have them yet.
Yeah,
she'll get there.
Yeah, she'll get there. I'm just glad she's not drawing with markers on your wall anymore. Now you've repainted your house.
Less frequently, yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Less frequently.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Still working on it.
Yeah. Sore spot. So the small story that told a bigger story that we've been talking about is this genealogy of Jesus. And there's all sorts of cogs in that wheel that might seem insignificant or not. Some of those names stood out immediately. Like you said, like Abraham, David. That stands out.
King David.
Sure.
I'm down with those being in the genealogy of Jesus. That's kind of cool. But really, we don't understand how biographies are written in that time, and your lineage was a part of your story. And the same is true in the four biographies we have of Jesus, the Gospels, that pay a lot of attention not only to Jesus' start and where his family lineage, but they also pay a great deal of attention to how he dies, because those were two keys on knowing who somebody was, and their identity was oftentimes found in their family lineage, but then also how they went out, And so that's why the biographies spend an inordinate amount of time talking about the last week of Jesus' earthly life and ministry. And so Jesus was somebody that was quite the storyteller, and his simple stories have spoken to, billions of people, and they're so basic on the surface that it seems like, how could this change the world? And yet he's like, once there was a man who had two sons, and one wanted his inheritance and ran away, and that story of the prodigal son has become a huge story. The same is true with the, once upon a time there was somebody traveling through the, in the road leading from Jerusalem to Jericho, and they were walking in the valley and they got attacked by some bandits. And a good Samaritan comes along, and those have institutions named after them. Hospitals are named the Samaritan Hospital, and those kind of things, because of the power of a simple story to connect with our life and also help us make sense of our lives and our story. And so that's what we find in the life of Jesus. And I don't. know how he came up with all of his stories. Was he walking along with his dad one day, and they were talking when he was a boy, or did Mary tell him stories? But one of the things we know is that Jesus was somebody who really studied the Old Testament and knew those scriptures by heart. And so I'm sure he had heard the story of Ruth that's listed in in the first words of Matthew's gospel.
Yeah.
And so who knows? Maybe he got it there from that simple story that we've been studying and this last week, the Unbroken Chain.
So the main theme was loyalty, friendship, and that and I think one of the really insightful things you pointed out is that Ruth's story unfolds in the midst of the chaos of the book of Judges, where there was no king, everyone did what was right in their own eyes.
Yep.
So why do you think Ruth's loyalty and commitment stand out so much against that backdrop?
Yeah, well, it's a very, very dark backdrop. It was dog-eat-dog world. One of the commentaries I was reading about the beginning of the book of Ruth, which is set in the time of the Judges, is that even the priests were on the take, and you didn't know if you were walking down the road, who would steal from you, who could kill you. I mean, things were it was lawless, and we've seen what it looks like for a small group of people to do whatever they think is right in their own eyes, but multiply that towards a nation, especially one that God had called his very chosen people. And so they kind of were victims of their own disobedience and sin. And into that story, that's very dark, you've got the light of this one woman who's not even from there. She's not among the named chosen people of God, but God gets a hold of her heart in a major way. And so on that dark background, she stands out as any light would in the midst of darkness.
So how does this story of Ruth and Naomi connect to modern challenges of loyalty and friendship? Like, we're not doing so great in this department.
No, we're not. I was with our youth a few years ago, and one of the seniors in high school, I said, how can we serve you all better? How can your pastors, just help you guys out? Because we're for you, but I need to know from you. I'm old now, so tell me from your perspective. And one of the guys spoke up. He said, "Man, we got to have some help talking to each other." He goes, "We know how to text each other. We know how to play video games remotely with other people from across the world, even. But we don't know how to talk to each other like face to face, and we don't know how to be essentially friends." And so I think friendship is a lost art. And one of the things that we're longing for, every study shows about the rate of loneliness in lots of age groups, including adolescents, but it doesn't stop with that. It's not just a problem that teenagers have adjusting or something like that. Senior adults are among the most lonely in the country right now. And so I think this friendship thing is a really important topic. And what we have in Ruth is a friend that lives out the words of Scripture, who sticks closer than a sister in her case, and is with her friend Naomi, her ex-mother-in-law, I guess, depending on how you look at it, and she's a shining example of friendship through thick and thin, because she's not only a friend when things are good, she's a friend when things fall apart, and it's hard to be a friend in those moments.
Yeah, Naomi probably wasn't an easy person to be friends with at that time. Everything had fallen apart on her.
That's right. So she lost her husband. So first there's a famine. She leaves Bethlehem with her husband Elimelech and her two boys. And I love saying that name.
Well, now I'm thinking Elimelech.
I know. That's how I memorized it.
You messed me up now.
Through the song. So they moved to a pagan land that for them was like leaving Florida and driving to Alaska. I mean, it was that long of a journey. And the culture was different, the worship was different, the language was different, everything was different. And there they are in this strange place, and she loses her husband. She's left with her two boys. They grow up and get married to women from that area, so they're Moabites is what they're called, which means they're not Israelites. So there was a big distinction in those days of that. And then both of her boys die. And this happens over about a 10-year period. And so she's left in a foreign land with none of her sons or her own husband. And for a woman in that time and place to be in that situation was pretty much a dead end. I mean, her goal would just be to survive. I mean, just to find enough sustenance to make it through the day. And this remarkable loyalty is shown by one of her daughters-in-law, Ruth, who, when Naomi, the widow, says, I'm going back to Bethlehem. I'm going back home because I heard the famine's over, so I'm going back home. And she says to her two daughters-in-law, you guys head back home too. You're still young enough. You can get married. You'll have a future. It'll be good for you, you know. And Ruth, the one daughter-in-law, leaves and goes back home, and hopefully she had a wonderful life.
Yeah.
But the other one, Ruth, makes this vow to stick by her friend, no matter what. And that comes at a great sacrifice, because now when Naomi goes back home to Bethlehem, the tables are turned. Now we're going in reverse. Literally, it's like put it in reverse and back it up. You know, you can cue the beep, beep, beep like it's a truck, because what Naomi experienced, now Ruth experiences. She's widowed as well. She goes to a foreign land where they have different customs and they speak a different language. However, the one thing they had in common now was somehow the faith of Naomi in the one true God, in Yahweh, had rubbed off on her daughter-in-law, so much so that even when Naomi's faith is faltering, Ruth is able to live out the faith and love her back. It's kind of like have you ever tried to throw a boomerang?
Not well, but yeah.
Yeah. I don't know that I've ever succeeded in catching one when it comes back. But I think Naomi has a boomerang blessing in Ruth. So she blessed Ruth somehow along the way. We don't know the details. But this blessing of Ruth comes back, it boomerangs back to bless Naomi now. And so that's the story that it makes it so compelling, because all of us, I think deep down, Larry, we want a friend like that.
Yeah.
We want one, because there's been times I've been very hard to love. You don't have to comment on that. Please don't. And yet, in those times, there are some people in my life that have stuck by me. And those are the friendships that I hold most dear. And I aspire to be that kind of a friend for others.
So her decision, Ruth's decision, is really one where she's choosing commitment over comfort.
Oh, yeah.
It would have been so much easier to say, I'm just going to stick with what I know.
Yeah. I'll go back home to my parents maybe and my siblings and then look for another husband and start over.
Yeah. Why do you think that's so challenging for us to find that, or to even aspire to be that kind of friend? Commitment over comfort.
Yeah. Well, I think the immediate need for comfort can sometimes outweigh the long-term benefit of commitment. I think we exchange short-term for long-term, because sometimes the long road is a hard one. And it's more narrow, and sometimes it requires endurance and tough decisions and those kind of things. And the immediate is so much of a better relief, just to lose yourself in a show, or to do something that in the short run satisfies, but in the long run it leaves us more hungry and thirsty than we were before. So what we see that's remarkable about this young woman is that she chooses a long-term commitment. And that longer road, I think, was motivated by her relationship with God. We don't know. We don't get a whole lot of details of it, but we see the fruit of it. And even people, when they go back to Bethlehem, they see the fruit of it. People take notice of a person of integrity and character and loyalty that Ruth is to Naomi.
Yeah, and it ends up working out okay.
It works out great. Yeah. She ends up finding a future, and a man named Boaz becomes her husband. They have a child, and all that's good. But what is the hard part about friendship that we see Ruth endure is when Naomi is hard to love.
Yeah.
Because when they return to Bethlehem, the women of Bethlehem come out, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, Naomi's back." And we remembered that she left, but now she's back. We wonder what happened to her. Where's her husband? Where's her boys? And she's alone, except for this foreigner who's with her, her daughter-in-law, who's still sticking by her side. And Naomi tells her neighbors and family members, I assume, "Hey, I'm changing my name now. It's no longer Naomi, which means delight in Hebrew. So imagine your name was Delight. Hey, Delight, it's good to see you. Oh, hi." She says, "Now you're going to call me Bitter." And she changes her name to Mara. And by changing her name, there's a lot of symbolism in that for that culture and that time and place, because that meant your very identity was changing. And her pain had become her identity. And the cool thing about Ruth is that she stuck with her in it. Now, the cool thing about Naomi that we discovered actually this morning in my men's group when we were talking through the book of Ruth together, is that it's hard, but it's very healthy that Naomi said the state of her soul.
Yeah.
And we
that's
just stopped there, and all of those guys were like, okay, hold on, we can all learn from this.
Yeah.
You know, walking along, how you doing? Great.
Oh, yeah, I'm good.
Fine. I don't even know what kind
When
of...
I'm ready to stick my head in an oven. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What kind of a word is fine? What is fine, right? Yeah, I mean, it's just to kind of get me out of this conversation.
Right.
And then there are times when we're honest and we say, well, you know what? Things are pretty rough right now. I'm feeling kind of bitter. And somebody wasn't expecting that. They were expecting fine, and they're just like, okay, then, well, I got to go. Look at the
have
time.
a nice day. Yeah.
Time for Caroline, or look
Yeah.
at that. I got a phone call.
Yep, got to go.
Right. So when that comes together and you're able to name the true state of your soul, and there's a friend that sticks with you even then, that's when you know you're blessed.
What Ruth does in that is what we call a ministry of presence. She just shows up, right? Like, and like you said on Sunday, that's half the battle or more is just showing up for your friends.
It may be more. There's been several quotes of people saying, you know, what is success? It's 80% or 90% is just being there, showing up.
Yeah.
And that kind of faithfulness is something that's pretty rare in our times and place. Because, I mean, we're just one button away from unfriending somebody at all times. And ghosting somebody or, you know, just ignoring people and moving on in the busyness of life. And yet Ruth seems to be one of these rare people, and we all need 1 to 3, you know. And if you got three or so, then you're among the most blessed people on earth to have a friend that sticks with you.
So you mentioned that being like one click away from unfriending somebody. Like with our many digital connections, and you talked about that a little on Sunday, we feel more isolated. So where we feel more isolated with the digital connections, how do we like practically practice showing up for one another like Ruth and Naomi did for one another?
Yeah. Well, I think it's as simple and as hard as what we're doing right now. And that's looking each other eyeball to eyeball and saying, this is what's up. This is what, and just to be in the presence of somebody else can lift somebody's spirit. But, you know, there are times that only the digital presence is available, you know, pandemics and storms and all the rest. But the rest of the time, to take the effort to be there. I wrote some cards a couple weeks ago to people just to say thanks. And I had a few people stop me and just say, I can't believe you took time to handwrite a note. And I was like, okay. I mean, it really wasn't that big of a deal. It took me about, 4 minutes or something. It wasn't a treatise or something. It was just a simple
card. We don't get stuff like that.
But when's the last time you got a personalized note? No. I mean, I get stacks of mail.
If you notice that some of the spam mail, they've even printed it to make it look like it's handwritten on the outside of the envelope, like because it's so rare.
And I've opened those, and then I've felt even more duped.
Like they're selling me a credit card.
Yeah, and email headings are like that now. And even a lot of text messages that we're getting. Hey, Wes, have you heard about this? And I'm like, oh my gosh, who's wanting me to hear about something cool? Yeah. And then it's like a lower interest rate on a credit card.
Right.
And I think those moments are so disappointing and so frustrating when I get a call about my car warranty, which I've had hundreds about. And then in the political season, well, I'm still honestly getting phone calls about
which is weird.
Politics.
Somebody overpaid their spending.
Do you know the calendar? Like,
it's over.
How much does this advertisement cost? Because, you know, the next election is a couple of years away at least. And so they're wasting their money, but it leaves us disappointed. But then the difference when a friend calls and says, how are you today? And then listens. I mean, that's the greatest gift we can give one another right now. And even digitally to do it in a non-efficient way. Yeah. And to linger on a FaceTime call. Linger on a Zoom call. My mom and I have started doing FaceTime calls the last few months. She lives in near Louisville, Kentucky. And I don't know, just to see her eyes matters. To see her smile matters. And yeah, it's more efficient to just send text.
Sure.
But we all long for that human contact, for somebody to just be there.
Yeah. Yeah. So Ruth suffers with Naomi. You talked about compassion being suffering with. How does her willingness to suffer with Naomi speak to those kind of friendships we need? I think we've gotten there a little bit already.
Yeah, we're touching on it. And it is just as simple as being there. And it's not having all the answers. It's not trying to seek to console with some kind of trite, trivial phrase. Like, oh, it's, the sun will come out tomorrow. Okay, that's from a musical called Annie, and I guess it was good. But it doesn't really help me today when I'm in the pit of despair, But if somebody just sits with me and listens, now we're getting closer to the strategy that Jesus had that was so history altering, because he came and lived among us. And for 30 years, we have very few records of what he actually did. They took him to the temple when he was a baby. He came back, when he was 12. We've got a little scene of his adolescence, and those are fun to read. But really, for 30 years, he just lived among us, and God with us. Those three words are some of the greatest things that we can hear. But here's something else. I'm with you.
Yeah.
I'm with you. And, when somebody says, why is this happening? What's going on? To not try to fix, to not try to solve, to not try to hurry it up, to not try to be efficient, but just to say, wow, I hear you. I hear you.
As you talked about that, I was thinking back when my dad passed away, the night of his visitation, like, how that's like so many people coming through, whatnot, all his work people, whatever. My covenant group showed up, but didn't tell me they were coming.
Oh, wow. These are your dearest friends.
Right.
Yeah.
And they didn't insert themselves in anything. They just made sure that I saw they were there. And they hung out in the back of the room on uncomfortable chairs in a stuffy old funeral parlor. And we're just there all night.
And that's what you remember, isn't it?
And that's what I remember.
Because that night you probably had dozens and dozens of trite phrases that people came up and in our line of work, we have a lot of joys, and we get to see a lot of holy moments that are so happy and awesome. But we also have a lot of holy moments in our line of work where we stand at the casket or the urn of a loved one, and we have a chance to watch those moments unfold. And there's an awkwardness that people feel that maybe if you know somebody that's going through trouble, don't feel like you have to come up with anything to say.
Yeah.
Because what matters is that you're there. You don't have to say some trite phrase like, well, and some Hallmark quote that you read.
Bad theology, still bad theology, even when it's written on a Hallmark card.
And God doesn't need another angel in heaven. If he did, frankly, he would make one.
Yeah.
And we don't turn out to be angels in heaven. We turn out to be humans.
That's another podcast.
Well, okay, that's another podcast. I won't even get started on that one. But that one I find annoying. And having been there at the opening door of a funeral home, where we come from, both of us are from, the sticks and the hills and Illinois and Kentucky. Abraham Lincoln lived at both places.
That's
but
right.
It's about the same. And there's a feeling that we have to say the right thing.
Yeah.
Or, no, just be there for your friends.
Yep.
Just walk alongside them. That's what Jesus did.
Yeah. So I know you didn't get to go as far into this in the message as I know you wanted to. So this is the cutting room floor aspect. You got into how Ruth's story and Naomi's story connects with the story of Jesus and this whole idea of the kinsman redeemer and whatnot. So like, why is this connection from bitterness to being okay with Naomi to holding a grandchild in her arms all the way to David down to Jesus? How's that meaningful, especially for those who feel like their life is bitter?
So this is where this little small story that took place in a small town, a little town of Bethlehem, comes, and it comes back around to bless us and give us hope. Because God saw the suffering that Naomi went through and used an unlikely friend to come alongside her. And then when they returned to Bethlehem, Boaz, through a whole bunch of turns of events, this local farmer takes on the role that was a part of the Jewish custom, and that when somebody is left alone and widowed, that they have one person in the family that's appointed as what they call the kinsman redeemer. So it's one of your relatives that comes and saves you when you're in trouble. And so through a whole series of events, Boaz becomes that for Naomi and Ruth. And so he and Ruth get married. They take Naomi into their home. They have a baby. And the next scene we get are those same women that came out in Bethlehem to greet Naomi when she called herself Mara, the bitter one. She's back to being Naomi, delighted to be holding a baby. Because in that baby is the restoration of her hope. It's the restoration of her family. It's the restoration of her very future. And the genealogy aside, all of us, when we find ourselves in the bitter place, need hope.
Yeah.
And that hope is found through a kinsman redeemer, one who came to be like a brother, like a family member for us, but not just to come alongside, but to save, to redeem, to take what was broken and what was lost and restore it to hope again. And it all came, yes, as a baby. For unto us in the town of David, Bethlehem, a Savior who has been born to us, is the announcement that the angels bring. And that is the coolest story, because we see it's a sneak peek. It says, you all preached in the first week, this is a prequel to the greatest story of all time. And it's the story every single one of us need to know today. When we're listening to this podcast, watching this podcast, we need to know that our Lord has not left us as orphans. He has come to us. And this is where I get so excited about the story, because there's so many themes that continue on in not only the lineage, but in the life of Jesus. And he is the fulfillment of all those hopes and dreams that have been dashed by circumstances and loss and even death itself. He comes, and that baby that Naomi held would eventually, through generations, lead to another baby who is Jesus, Christ the Lord, who has come to save us, but saving not just from hell, but to save us from the hell that we're living in, the bitterness that has invaded all of our lives, the things that are not part of God's good plan. He comes and gives us what Jeremiah said is the Lord's specialty, a hope and a future. And he spoke those words in the middle of a miserable time.
Captivity, exile.
You name it, it was going on. And so these stories in the Old Testament point to a greater story that we can all be invited into today. And it's not fiction. It's not Star Wars. It's not Toy Story. No, this really happened. And Jesus is really here through the power of the Holy Spirit today. And so whatever bitterness we're going through, at least we have an ever-present help in time of trouble.
At least.
At the very minimum, we can know, as an old song says, we're never alone, never alone. And never will he leave us alone. And that fear of abandonment that has haunted me in my life has been healed by just the presence of Jesus, that no matter what comes, and including my own mistakes and my own failures, that I'm never alone. And that can make all the difference.
I think we should leave it right there.
That's the best news I've ever heard.
That's great news. We hope wherever you're at, however you're listening or watching, that you find some hope in that, no matter what's going on or has happened in your life or what challenge you're facing, that there is always hope, and he's come to be with us and to redeem us.
Let me just say this one last thing. Be on the lookout for him.
Yeah.
Because your covenant group came in and they were quiet.
Yep.
And they sat down on those chairs. And that's kind of how Jesus does it. You know, there's not a big pomp and circumstances. Most people missed it. It was just the shepherds that knew. And he's here with us now. And we have to open our eyes and see. So be on the lookout for him wherever you all are today.
Yep. We'll see you next time as we continue with the Unbroken Chain. There's another link to talk about it.
There is. It's going to be good.
It's going to be good. We'll see you. Have a great week. God bless you.